This is the Good Morning ISLA 200 show.
This podcast was prepared by the Fall 2023 cohort of ISLA 200 Islamic Civilizations at McGill University.
Grab a warm drink and tune in as our presenters take you on a deep dive into Islamic history with reflections on how they relate to contemporary Muslim life and culture.
Hey there! I'm Valentina Foy, and welcome to the episode where me and my classmates try to answer some of the many questions someone can have when learning about the Islamic tradition of Hajj. So, you've probably stumbled across this word at one point in your life, and like me, have asked yourself, what's Hajj? If you're curious enough, come, grab a chair, take a seat and buckle in as we answer the who, what, where, and whens and whys of the Islamic pilgrimage and why it's important to not only Muslim groups, but people all over the world. We'll be covering subjects such as pre-Islamic poetry in the Kaaba, prayers and recitations within the Quran, and explain how different branches of Islam can come together in spite of their differences. But before getting into it all, I think the best place to start this off is with one of the most frequently asked questions about Hajj, which is simply, what is it? Eleanor, take it away.
So, Hajj is undoubtedly the most well-known pilgrimage in Islam. It is one of the 5 pillars of Islam and is considered a duty for all Muslims who are in good health and can afford the journey to Mecca.
Well, that's a big commitment for someone to make in their lives. There must be some history there, isn't it?
It takes place during the month called Hijjah. And, Hajj has many rituals, including tawaf, which is the circumambulation of the Kaaba, and sa'i, the running between the hills of Safa and Marwa. Umrah is similar to Hajj, but can take place at any time of the year.
Okay, so I got some history, but that doesn't explain what's the meaning of the Kaaba. Why is it important?
So pilgrims also enter the holy sanctuary of the Grand Mosque of Mecca through a different gate. And the pilgrimage of Kaaba is specified in numerous Quranic verses, including 5.97 verse, which reads, God made the Kaaba the sacred house, maintaining it for humanity, and the sacred month, and the sacrificial gift, and garlanded. That is so that you will know that God knows whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth. By the way, this is a Bakhtiar's translation.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that when Hajis perform Hajj, and there are some rituals performed around the Kaaba. Why are they performed, and what are they?
Hadith are accounts of the Prophet's life that determine much of the Islamic practice. Some of these texts provide specifics on how to conduct the rituals associated with Hajj. I'll give you an example. One hadith reports that the Prophet offered 4 rak'ah of the Zuhr prayer in Medina and 2 rak'ah of Asr prayer at Dhul Hulaifa, this hadith and others tell Muslims how to execute the particular rituals of Hajj, which include specific prayers and supplications, as well as the order in which the traditions associated with Hajj should be performed. So, in the end, pilgrimage guides also serve as an important aid for Muslims by giving instructions on what prayers and what supplications to perform at particular sites. For centuries, these existed in a written form, while today Muslims also have the option of electronic forms of pilgrimage like guides and smartphone apps for both Hajj and Umrah, as well as for other pilgrimages known as generally the Ziyarat.
Okay, so thank you, Eleanor, for explaining that to us. Now we have a basic understanding of the significance of Hajj. But I want to move on to why is poetry so important through the lens of the Kaaba and the rise of Islam through the pre-Islamic era. I think I will pass this on to Lily She will explain to us what this all means.
Hi, yes, of course. So, to start off, we can explore the captivating history of the Kaaba, which is one of the holiest sites in Islam and a focal point of the Hajj pilgrimage. I want to delve into the evolution of the Kaaba, tracing its roots back to the pre Islamic era through the lens of poetry and how it's been transformed with the rise of Islam. So, for starters, in the pre Islamic era, the Kaaba was a very significant place for poets, symbolizing power, pride, and reverence. It was common to mention the Kaaba in its role in Muslim society in poems. It celebrated the fact that the Kaaba as a center of trade, pilgrimage, and a gathering place for people. In the pre Islamic era, the Kaaba housed various religious idols, reflecting the diverse religious practices of the time. As a symbol for pilgrimage, it was a place of unity and a spiritual destination.
Actually, could you tell me more about the rise of Islam and the transformation of the Kaaba?
Of course. So, in the rise of Islam, the Kaaba, in the context of pilgrimage, went through a transformative journey. The Prophet Muhammad declared the Kaaba as the central destination for Muslims worldwide, which made it the most significant pilgrimage site. Hajj is a pilgrimage made to the Kaaba. In the rise of Islam, the Kaaba was made into the house of Allah, making it a monotheistic sanctuary.
What about poetry? What makes poetry so important to the pilgrimage?
Well, following the rise of Islam, poets continued to honor the Kaaba through their verses, but with a significance on the Hajj pilgrimage. Poetry has always been vital to the survival of culture and history, and so in these contexts, it's no different. Poets would recount the emotional and spiritual journey associated with the Hajj pilgrimage. We can look to poets like Ibn al-Farid or al-Busiri.
If you don't mind, could we maybe return back to the Jahiliyyah era and maybe talk about its significance as well, just to clear some things up?
Oh, most definitely. The Jahiliyyah era was characterized as a period of polytheism. It was the period before the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Its direct translation means ignorance, as it was a period of time before Islam. I want to talk about Al-Kanza, a female poet of the Jahiliyyah era. She is a complicated figure because much of white feminism views her as separate from her society, a quote-unquote remarkable figure. I'd like to highlight that she was one of the many women who wrote poetry. She was just recognized for it. In the pre-Islamic period, women played the role of mourners, and Al-Kanza wrote in the genre of Ritha, which is a genre women were expected to write. To talk about poetry in all these different eras, we have to look at all genres of poetry and the context in which they were written. We cannot write off women poets because, let's say, they only wrote Ritha, which, by the way, is most likely not true because what was considered poetry for women was different for men. So, for example, if men, wrote poetically, every single thing that they did was poetry. But for women, their mourning speeches that they might have or other things that they might recite was not necessarily considered poetry or wasn't necessarily written down as was mainly just verbal. Um, I would say if there was more documentation, we could look into the verbal poems that women might have had in their lives in these eras. Also, I've got to mention that men also wrote Ritha, and so why is their work not being seen as simply just emotional as are women poets? And this is significant because when in that time, these eras, poets were very, very important. They were very well respected. And so what women did when it was not considered poetry, it honestly, it's a disservice to these women who in these eras, might have recited or said, or wrote poetry. And we have to give credit where it's due. And it's also interesting because, again, it's hard because we want to say yes, like Alcanza was, she was a very smart woman. She wrote beautifully. She did amazing. She wrote amazing poetry, and she was, you could see that through her work. But it's like the language and the languages that we use when we talk about these topics is very important because when we say remarkable, well, then it suggests that okay, this is something that didn't exist in this era, but she's like a remarkable part of the era that like she was able to quote unquote, like stand out. And really, again, that is the disservice towards the many women of that era who most likely, lived through poetry and had these very meaningful things to say. And history and white feminism and misogyny just didn't has not allowed that to really thrive in the way that, for example, male poets of that time or male poets, throughout history, no matter what topic that you're talking about, have been allowed to thrive.
How can we relate this to the Kaaba, though?
Definitely related to the Kaaba, because given that Alkanza's work provides us with a unique perspective on the Jahiliyyah era, through her poetry, we gain valuable insights into the lives, emotions, and aspirations of the people at that time, which further enriches our understanding of the cultural and historical context surrounding the Kaaba's evolution. We gain a deeper appreciation for the diverse voices that has shaped the history of the Kaaba and the broader cultural landscape of the Arabian Peninsula.
Great. Do you have any final words that you would like to mention before I move this on to Layla's point?
So, to summarize, the evolution of the Kaaba from the pre-Islamic era to the rise of Islam is intricately connected to the concept of pilgrimage, to the Hajj. From being a center of polytheistic worship celebrated in poetry, it transformed into such a significant shrine in Islam, attracting many of the pilgrims for the Hajj. The Kaaba became a focal point for Muslims worldwide, and it embodies unity and devotion. The poetry of both eras provides us with a glimpse into the reverence and spiritual significance associated with the Kaaba as a pilgrimage destination. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lily, for explaining that to us. I would like to move on to the importance of the Quran, because that is a big part of Hajj. And I'll leave this with Layla to explain.
So it is one of the 5 pillars of Islam that Muslims must pray 5 times a day, notably to maintain a sense of closeness and adoration to God. And as a matter of fact, all practicing Muslims dispersed worldwide, whether Sunni or Shia, the 2 main branches of Islam, pray towards one specific direction in unity. They pray towards Mecca, and more specifically towards Al-Kaaba, which is this big black cube that we always see Muslim pilgrims walking around. And in Arabic, the direction of the Kaaba that has such a unifying symbol is called Al-Qibla. And the little fun fact is that usually when you go on a trip with a Muslim that prays, one of the first things they will do when arriving at the destination or the hotel is to look at their compass app to determine the direction of the Qibla since it changes depending on where you are around the globe. And yeah, so really the only time where you don't have to do this is during the pilgrimage, notably during the Hajj, when you can actually see the Kaaba from your very own eyes and don't need a compass to know where it is, because you can literally pray right in front of this sacred Islamic monument. And as I have a lot of relatives that actually did Al-Hajj, and I asked them how they felt to pray in such a symbolic atmosphere for Islam, and they all agreed to say that they never felt closer to Allah. So when you think about it, that would make sense, since the Kaaba is described as the house of Allah in the Quran. More specifically, in the longest surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, which literally translates to Surah Al-Cow, because Baqarah means cow. So in the ayah 125th of this surah, the importance of praying towards Al-Kaaba as a symbol of the house of Allah is highlighted and defined as a safe and protected place for Muslims to pray and feel the closest to God. And the ayah goes as such in Arabic. وَإِذْ جَعَلْنَا لِلْبَيْتَ مَثَابَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَأَمْنًا لِلطَّائِفِينَ مِنْ مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلًّى وعهدنا إلى إبراهيم وإسماعيل أن طهر بيتي للطائفين والعاكفين والركع السجود.
Actually, you know what? Could you translate word for word in English the ayah that you recited?
Yeah, so since the Quran is considered to be the revelation of God, and that this revelation was made in Arabic originally, it is believed that there are no possible translations and only interpretations in other languages of this sacred text. And truthfully, as a person that does speak and understand Arabic, I believe that there are a lot of things that simply cannot be translated neither into French nor English from Arabic, and that's mostly because of the emphasis that we put on the pronunciation of certain words in Arabic as opposed to French and English, and of the big importance that is given to sound that simply cannot be mirrored in other languages. However, over the years, there were a lot of different interpretations and understandings of the sacred text. And one interpretation of the ayah that I recited earlier that I found on Quran.com is the following. So, and mention when we made the house, talking about the Kaaba, a place of return for the people and a place of security, and take, O believers, from the standing place of Ibrahim, a place of prayer, and we charged Ibrahim and Ismail, saying, purify my house for those who perform tawaf, and those who are staying there for worship, and those who bow and prostrate in prayer.
In the interpretation of the ayah, you mentioned the act of tawaf. Could you enlighten us on what that means?
Yeah, for sure. So the tawaf is basically the act of walking around the Kaaba 7 times, and it is one of the main rituals performed by Muslims pilgrim during the Hajj. And actually, that makes me remember a funny story that when I was about 8 years old, my dad went to do Hajj with 2 of his friends, and at the time my cousins and I all attended this Islamic school every Saturday to learn Quran and Islamic history. And during the period of the pilgrimage, which is at the 12th and last month of the Islamic lunar calendar for Hajj, while a lot of our relatives left for Mecca, my Islamic school would do this kind of simulation of a tawaf. So the school had this giant stuffed toy shaped like the Kaaba, and they would put it in the middle of the gym, and all the kids would walk around together around it for 7 times. So like as if they were in Mecca at the same time as their parents or relatives. And we would all sing this song called طلع البدر علينا, which translates to the moon has risen over us. And honestly, at the time, we really just had a lot of fun skipping Quran classes to reunite with our friends and sing. But this nasheed held an important symbolism, as according to certain hadiths, was sung by the people of Medina to welcome the Prophet at the end of Al-Hijrah. So when he traveled all the way from Mecca to Medina because he got persecuted. And I actually thought you guys might enjoy hearing a part of this beautiful nasheed sung by a Canadian children's choir to welcome Syrian refugees in 2016.
Thank you, Layla, for showing that song. Not only are we getting a podcast, but a little song with it as well. So thank you for that. Next, I want to move on to another subject. Now that we have a basic understanding of the functions and importance of Hajj, we're left with the question of what is Hajj? So what is it? What's the meaning of it? And how does it promote tolerance between people of all kinds of faiths, So, no one's better to explain this but my classmate, Gabrielle. Go ahead, take the stage. Please explain to us what Hajj is.
Thank you so much for having me today.
No problem.
So, as mentioned, I'll be talking about Hajj and how it brings people together. And the first kind of idea that I want to talk about is how it erases differences among the different branches of Islam. For example, both Sunni and Shia do Hajj. And the second part, I'll be focusing on how Hajj is a collective space where women from around the world can connect with their faith. Since Hajj attracts around 2 to 3 million people a year, it is also a gathering of people from all around the world, from different ethnicities, different branches of Islam, and gender. According to the Cambridge article entitled Estimating the Impact of the Hajj, Religion and Tolerance and Islam's Global Gathering, the Hajj, by being a global collective action, favors a sense of unity and equality, not only towards Muslims, but also towards all other religious faiths. A prominent example of this is a letter that Malcolm X wrote to Mecca. He talked about how this experience changed his mindset. He says, "We are all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and the non-white." As mentioned in the articles, Hajis are 22% more likely to declare that people of all different religions are equal, and 11% more likely to state that adherents of different religions can live in harmony. Scientific studies have shown that group interactions promote conflict in competitive settings, but lessen violence in cooperative ones. Moreover, the fact that Hajis are participating in the same journey erases all distinctions among different Muslims and promotes religious diversity.
Interesting.
As stated in the paper, the 14th century Muslim explorer Ibn Battuta noted that because followers of different schools of Islam pray together at Mecca, this often led to a mixing of religious practices. Now I want to move on to the part here where I'm talking about women in Hajj, and I'll, at the end, bring some historical background on women in Hajj. So, this peaceful and positive mentality extends across gender lines. The Cambridge study claims that Hajis are 6% more likely to think that women are spiritually better than men, which represents an increase of over 50%. Male and female interactions, such as praying along each other, or a normal part of the Hajj, since both genders are equally represented in numbers.
I'll stop you there. I've got a question.
Of course.
From taking that topic and going on along with it, what does this mean for women's right in Muslim countries?
So this does not demonstrate that there's a greater acceptance of Hajis for the feminist cause, for example, or women's rights, but rather promotes the fair treatment of women within the realm of Islam. Hajj is an eye-opening adventure that transforms the pilgrim at a personal and spiritual level by exposing them to a diversity of Islamic practices and beliefs. This exposure is possible when smaller groups are exchanging with Hajis from other countries who share distinct views and practice Islam differently. Hajj can connect people from across the globe and highlight a diversity of religious practices due to the mixing between Islam and local customs. A very prominent example of this is the Iknad Mongol princess El Quatulge, who on her way to Mecca actually hunted as means of survival, and this demonstrates the influence of Mongolian steppe culture on her fulfillment of the Hajj. So here a little bit of background on women in Hajj. So originally women's Hajj journey was very arduous, but they were still encouraged to participate in Hajj, as explained in the following hadith. It is reported on the authority of Aisha bint Abi Bakr that she asked, "O Prophet, shouldn't we women go out for Hajjad with you? Indeed, I don't think any deed in the Quran is preferable to Hajjad." "No," he replied. "The best and most beautiful Hajjad is pilgrimage, Hajj, to the house. That is the Hajj which has been accepted by God." In the Quran, there is no distinction between how men and women should undertake Hajj. However, the Prophet's companions claimed that women needed to be accompanied by a mahram. Gender-based norms and obligations have shaped women's partaking in Hajj, particularly in the present day where modern bureaucratic states, such as Saudi Arabia, put a considerable amount of stress on the control of women. In general, the rules to which women must abide to depend not only on their country of origin or on Saudi Arabia's Wahhabi ideology, but also on their religious affiliation. So, for example, Sunni and Shia have different preconditions to women in Hajj.
So, All right, that really clears up with a feminist kind of view, it really clears up the participation of women in Hajj, and it helps us to understand what women's role is in Hajj and how it's not separated to men.
Yeah.
So
they're really put on an equal scale,
and it's not
really
viewed,
encouraged to do Hajj.
Yes, and it's not viewed through like men and women. It's a view of like all togetherness, like everybody.
Yeah,
together.
because one of the 5 pillars of Islam is doing the Hajj,
pilgrimage.
and that includes every Muslim.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful conclusion to this podcast. Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for explaining that to us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here.
No problem.
Bye.
Ciao. All right, so I'm curious to know why Hajj is so well known between like so many different cultures. Like we've come to understand that this isn't just an event pertaining to just one community. It's not just for the Muslim community, but it's more of like individualistic, personal level. But why? Okay, so I'll give this one to you, Amelia. Please enlighten us.
Okay, you're totally right. I think it is very important to be able to dive deep into like the diversity of human experiences, even though we're exploring a typical Muslim tradition in this episode of our podcast. So the Hajj, as we mentioned previously, is a fascinating journey to the Saudi Arabian mythical city of Mecca. This sacred pilgrimage unifies millions and millions of Muslims from every corner of the globe in order to complete one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Okay, so how do different cultures experiences come to approach Hajj?
Well, we can easily qualify Hajj as an individual spiritual journey, which has the characteristic of unifying Muslims, transcending cultural boundaries from an anthropological point of view. The beauty of the Hajj lies in its duality of being both at the same time, like an universal right, and its ability of being adopted and perceived differently by every individual person that practices it. Like cultural groups from all over the world bring their own traditions and expressions through their distinctive clothing. For example, diverse spoken languages, food, chants.
Their own perspectives.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Therefore, the expression, like the cultural interpretation of the tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba, for example, can be different depending on cultural background. Its purpose still remains to walk by keeping the Kaaba on one's left. So the pilgrims all respect this rule, for sure.
So there's one rule that everybody respects.
Yeah.
There's just one constant thing.
Exactly. And that's the thing that unifies them all. But at the same time, the chants, the rhythm, and the style of walking can be different.
Varies a lot.
Yeah. And it's like a hypnotizing diversity dance which unifies Muslims from across the globe. Well, that's how I like to see it.
Well, nicely put. That's actually a really nice way to put it. Okay. But how does this cultural diversity affect Hajj experience?
Well, more from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, less
Hajj,
personal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hajj offers a microscopic view of the global Muslim community around the world.
All right.
And their respective traditions, including traditional food, languages, chants, and clothings, which can be personal to every single culture we can see during the Hajj period. And I don't know how to say it, but qualifying it as a cultural melting pot in Mecca.
A bunch of different spices and personality traits and everything just mixed into one kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that. Just one big mixing pot of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get that.
And I would love to talk about a podcast I listened to recently in order to prepare for our podcast, which is very ironic. Well, in this podcast, like the main guest speaker is Amin, and he shares his experience of doing Umrah,
which is a different pilgrimage, right? Not the same as Hajj.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a Muslim living in a Western society, which I think is a very interesting point of view, we should like explore. And he provides an eye-opening story about his visit to Makkah. And I would just like to refer you to the podcast name, which is The Strangers Podcast. And I have to admit that I only listened to one episode, the episode 6, which is called Journey to Makkah, but I highly recommend.
Okay, well, now that you recommend this, like, I want to know your opinion. Like, what are the major religious events, like the Hajj? Like, the Hajj influences Muslims' life across the world. Like, from this podcast, did you get an answer from? Did you get that answer?
Yeah, sure. It provided a very like interesting answer, but in my I think that it's easier to talk about Hajj's influence on cities which have like
high diversity.
Yeah, higher diversity level.
Okay.
Just like Montreal, for example. Like we live in a highly diversity like part of Canada. So we can say that Muslim families come together during the Hajj period, and they share stories about the pilgrimage. They shared food. They basically celebrate being Muslims. Therefore, I think that even though the Hajj is a religious event, its influence on broader cities and countries in the world is about cultural celebration, like mostly about cultural celebration. Here in Montreal, there is a food festival during the Hajj period, which allows like Montrealers, regardless of their faith and religious belief, to explore Muslim culinary traditions. And the Hajj Food Festival is, in my opinion, a concrete representation of how the Hajj influences life in Montreal. Like, there is also an emerging trend of Hajj-inspired art from local Muslims, which is particularly like influenced during the Hajj period.
Yeah.
So, like briefly, art and food are international and intercultural languages that everyone can understand and have the capacity of connecting people from different backgrounds.
All right. Okay. So, to make sure that I understand, so I think it would be safe to say that so even though the Hajj is a religious event that takes place in Mecca, its influence is observed worldwide, not just in Muslim communities. It pertains to non-Muslim communities all over the world. And in Montreal, for example, there's bridges that connect these two communities together. Yeah. Would you say that would be...
Exactly. I think you totally understood what I saw.
All right, perfect.
Good.
Then thank you, Emilia, for explaining that to me. Well, guys, now that the episode is coming to an end, and we wanted to help it wrap it all up with just a talk all together. We want to guide this discussion by a book that we read in class called 3 Centuries of Travel, written by Muslim women. I think we'll focus on the part where they talk about travel as a pilgrimage, which fits perfectly into the subject of our podcast, of our episode of the podcast. So before that, I just want to say it was so difficult to get us all together, but we're here. We're done,
we're
right?
Here.
Right, we're here. We are. So we need an applause for that. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start. Put it simply. What did we think? What did we like it? Did we not like it? Like,
yeah. If I could just start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like what I really appreciate about this text, and everything I learned about women and Hajj in general, or even Islam, because I didn't previously have any knowledge on it. Was that it's really like there's a plurality of the religion, and not only is it practiced differently based on the different branches of Islam, but also a certain plurality and diversity that comes with self-interpretation of Islam. And that's what I thought was like particularly like important in this text. And I think it might be a reason, this like plurality, for the variety of interpretations in ways in which Muslims experience Hajj.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I absolutely agree with what Gabrielle just said. Like what personally caught my attention was the emphasis on Muslim women's travel writing and, shedding lights on their experiences as they embarked on pilgrimages and, the acknowledgement that pilgrimage was one of the few avenues available for travel for women speaks volume about the social cultural context of the time. Also,
I think too.
Yeah.
Go on, guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think too, like it's interesting because it's highlighting like the diverse styles of narration that women were able to do, and it's like again, like you just said, like women, this was a way for women to travel in this time where it's like, okay, maybe they had limited, opportunities. And I would like to even just relate it to like poetry and like my part of the podcast. And when we look at like, the diverse styles of narration, you can see like, although poetry is not like directly mentioned, it definitely is, in part of the narrations of pilgrimage by Muslim women. And I just think that the document really does like a good job of like really highlighting the fact that there might be poetic elements of description of pilgrimage and, the limited opportunities that women had, but that's, the experiences.
Yeah, no, totally. No, I totally agree with you.
Definitely. And to jump on the point of Lily and Eleanor, like this book does like talk about the pilgrimage as an excuse for Muslim women to travel. And honestly, to this day, this is still instaured in like more conservative Muslim families where like men and fathers and husbands are like scared to let their daughters and wives travel alone. And that's all due to security and because they care about their protection. And often I feel like in the Western media, it's often like criticized as the men want to belittle the women, and it's a sexist thing. As in opposite, they act in this way because they care about the people they love most. The same way as like, for example, your parents when they let you go to college, they're really sad, they're scared for you, for your safety.
No,
Same thing for Muslim men with their daughters and women, and I feel like the pilgrimage is a really good thing to talk about.
I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
I do agree with you too. And I couldn't while I was reading the text, I couldn't stop asking myself this question: why can women only travel for religious purposes?
Yeah.
And I love the text because it shows how strong and persistent women travelers are to overcome gender-related challenges in order to pursue and celebrate their faith. But on the other hand, the fact that pilgrimage is directly related to traveling and cultural exchange is fascinating, and that could be directly linked to my part of the podcast when I talk about cultural diversity and everything. So yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
I totally agree. I think one other aspect that I really enjoyed was the fact that it's not just about a physical travel. It's more of a profound spiritual journey that these women undertake. And the persistence they show, driven by the spiritual significance of the pilgrimage, is so inspiring to me. And also in the landscape of limited opportunities for travel, they find a way and deserve admiration.
Yeah, no, you've got a point there.
Just to add on to kind of the idea of a spiritual journey, I think another point that was particularly interesting for me was how all these Muslim women, there's such a broad definition of these women. Not only are they women or Muslim, there's a whole numerous parts of their own identity that is just so fascinating to me. You can study their gender, their religion, their ethnicity, because they come from all around the world, and even the social hierarchy, because in the past lots of these women came from very wealthy and prestigious families who could actually afford to travel. I don't know, I just think it's really fascinating to think about the diversity of these women and their experiences, but at the same time how they're all acting through faith, and they're all connecting with their faith, although they're so diverse and different in their identity.
And in a way, I feel like they're all coming together in a kind of metaphorical way. They're coming together as women, and I think it's a very supportive thing, because they all went through the same troubles and the same kind of hardships, but now they're coming together in a way we're going to be doing this, even though it kind of goes against certain values, certain situations that they've been stuck in, right? Emilia, did you have something to say?
Yeah, sure. I also wanted to highlight the fact that, like, that part of the text that they talk about, like, Southeast Asian women's experiences of a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And the fact that they're not as, like, recorded and as written about as men's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's true.
in my opinion, they're still, like, pretty valuable from, like, a linguistic and cultural point of view, especially.
Mm-hmm. No, that's totally right. I totally forgot about that aspect. I totally forgot about that section right there.
It's very interesting.
Okay. And Lily?
Which kind of makes me think as well as like how, us as women are able to discuss through these women of the past and through these accounts and through these like writing. And I just think that's kind of beautiful, and how, in the past it was like they came together, in faith, and they went to the Kaaba and they like this pilgrimage, and how like this is kind of like a mini, version of like coming together and talking about it and talking about,
and that's what
and
we're
all
doing.
of our different, right? And all of our different like cultural backgrounds and like whether religious or not, like we can just come together, talk about the Hajj, talk about all of these things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's like that's what we're doing right now. That's what they were doing, we're doing right now as women.
That's what I was thinking about. Like, it just reminds me of us as a group of we all come from different cultural backgrounds. I mean, you, Valentina, is Portuguese, and
you're Italian,
French, and we have Bulgarian, Italian, and we're all coming together as
American over here, Arabic over there, Quebecois down here. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think this is a perfect place to like wrap it all up, finish it all off.
Yeah.
Kind of like we kind of came to. Oh no, we're not. Layla.
Well, no, it's just I wanted to say that I'm really grateful that I was able to talk about this with you guys and share like all of our experience and thoughts and reflections about it, depending on our backgrounds. And I think that's really beautiful and wonderful that we come all together the same way that Muslims come together during the Hajj, whichever the branches are all together.
No, thank you so much. No, I feel like that's like a mutual consensus between all of us. Like I think we're.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, wait,
yeah,
Amelia?
thank you very much for hosting the podcast. You're doing an amazing job.
Well, don't stroke my ego. Thank you so much,
guys. We had a great discussion, so I think it's time to wrap it up.
Yeah,
definitely.
Guys, let's finish it off with a bang. Okay. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
This podcast was prepared by the fall 2023 cohort of ISLA 200 Islamic Civilizations at McGill University.